for today's movie review, I'll be reviewing Avengers Endgame, the overall 22nd installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that at one point was originally supposed to be called Avengers Infinity War Part 2, but was later changed to being just called Avengers Endgame for some reason. That would act as the grand finale to the ongoing MCU storyline that started back in 2012 with the first Avengers movie to what many people are calling the Infinity Saga. And as of this movie review, Avengers Endgame not only became the highest grossing movie of 2019, but also became the highest grossing movie of all time, surpassing the 2009 James Cameron movie Avatar, even though Avengers Endgame managed to do this through a re-release, but who's paying attention? And despite this movie being one of my more anticipated movies of 2019, I will admit that advertising to this movie didn't really get me hyped up for the movie because of how lackluster it was, which on one hand was both a good and bad thing about the movie, which I'll talk about in the review itself. But anywho, is Avengers Endgame a good way to conclude the MCU's Infinity Saga? As for the plot of the movie, with Thanos succeeding in obtaining all of the Infinity Stones and using them to wipe out half of all life in the universe, the Avengers, along with their remaining allies, decide to embark on one last mission to undo the actions that were done by Thanos. Will our remaining heroes succeed in their mission, or will their last stand lead into something much worse? In terms of what I liked about the movie, the one thing that really impressed me about Avengers Endgame is the movie's pacing, considering that the movie itself is 3 hours, but from the time the movie begins until it reaches the credits, the movie moves at a pretty good pace to a point that the 3 hours itself fly by super fast, to a point that I thought I watched a 2-hour movie, not a 3-hour movie. To get an idea of how well paced this movie is, I generally compare the pacing to this movie to that of James Cameron's The Abyss, a movie that's also 3 hours in length, but when you sit down and watch it, it doesn't feel like a 3-hour movie, due to the movie being so well paced that it goes by relatively quickly to a point that, again, like I said earlier, you think you're watching a 2-hour movie. I also love how much comic book elements they included into this movie that I've been wanting to see since the start of the MCU. Everything from Rocket Raccoon's classic outfit to Captain America's shield getting broken, since that was something that I thought was going to happen in Age of Ultron when they teased it back in that movie. Sure, it kind of did in the dream sequence, but it never actually happened in the actual movie itself. To seeing Pepper Potts take up the mantle of rescue and actually take part in the final battle. And the way they included these aspects of the comics into the movie, I thought were handled very well. And in some ways were built up, not perfectly, but good enough. Also, I thought this movie did a better job of handling Thanos here than how he was portrayed in Avengers Infinity War, because when you watch all of the movies featuring Thanos before Avengers Infinity War, he has a certain personality to him. He's very power hungry, he's bloodthirsty, he's also wearing that golden armor from head to toe. But when you get to Avengers Infinity War, we don't see that Thanos. It seems like the filmmakers decided to do a 180 and pull out the rug from under us and be, hey, were you expecting a bloodthirsty tyrant? Nope, here's a guy that just goes around the universe in space jeans and a space wife beater collecting some gems, who happens to be a sympathetic eco-terrorist. And even though I think Thanos was good in that movie, it just didn't feel like the one we deserved, or the one we were building up to. With the Thanos that appears in this movie during the climax, this is the Thanos I wanted to see, the bloodthirsty tyrant, him battling all the Avengers in this golden armor. This felt like the proper villain that we've been waiting for. And while you can still see some elements of the Thanos that appeared in the previous movie, this one feels more like the Thanos we're all familiar with. Another aspect of this movie that I liked is the way the movie utilized the elements that were established in the Ant-Man movies. Because in the grand scheme of things, the Ant-Man movies are nothing more than just harmless, fun filler that you don't really think would contribute a lot to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it actually makes me appreciate a movie such as Ant-Man and the Wasp a lot more. Sure, that movie does a good job of being just harmless, fun filler until the next big event movie, but it also takes movies such as Ant-Man and Wasp and makes them relevant to this movie by having the Avengers using the quantum realm to retrieve the Infinity Stones. And speaking of the quantum realm, I do like how the filmmakers incorporated this aspect of the Ant-Man movies and make modifications to it in order for our heroes to time travel. Now sure, the idea of a superhero movie featuring time travel is nothing new. Look no further than movies such as X-Men Days of Future Past or even the animated DC movie Justice League Flashpoint Paradox. But as far as a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie is concerned, it's a new element brought to the table. Now sure, some people might consider Doctor Strange using a time loop to piss off Dormammu to be time travel, but it's not. At least this here, we get to see the characters go in different periods in time and see how events unfold from different points of view. And speaking of which, I also love how this movie gives answers to questions that I both thought of a long time ago and also answers questions that I didn't even think of. For example, one of my biggest gripes with Captain America the Winter Soldier when I first saw it was the mid-credit scene, and I wondered, how did Hydra retrieve Loki's scepter? Because the last time we saw it was in the first Avengers movie with Black Widow holding it along with the other Avengers standing over Loki. So I never understood when or how Hydra got it. In this movie, we get to actually see the moment in which a bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, who are really Hydra agents, walk to Black Widow. Black Widow gives them the scepter and they walk off with it, thus answering that question. But the movie also answered questions that I didn't even think of, such as what did the Sanctum Sanctorum do during the 2012 Chitauri invasion in the first Avengers movie? We actually get to see the Ancient One while at the Sanctum Sanctorum battling the Chitauri soldiers. That just blew my mind because I didn't even think about that. And it is so cool to see how Marvel, again, incorporating different aspects of the Marvel Cinematic Universe into this one movie. And it also makes me appreciate the climax of the first Avengers movie a lot more now, knowing that the Ancient One indirectly took part in the Battle for New York in the first Avengers movie. Also, much like the previous few installments of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I also think that the production design in regards to the costumes, the set designs, along with the special effects are on point and look just as good as some of the other installments of the MCU. I also thought the movie had some really good cinematography in regards to how the shots were composed for certain scenes. Probably my favorite shot in the entire movie occurs before all the other heroes arrive and you have that wide shot of Captain America with his broken shield and holding the hammer, looking up, and you see the army of Thanos approaching him. I just think that shot is really epic and nicely lit as well. And the last thing that I liked about the movie is that final battle, because in my opinion, it's one of the few times the ending of the movie is what saved the movie. Because do you know how there's certain movies that for the first 2/3 are pretty good or okay for the most part, but then something happens at the end which really turns you off, disliking the whole movie altogether? This here, it's kind of the other way around, and I'll get into why I don't like everything before the climax as much, but as far as the actual final battle is concerned, this to me is what saved the movie, for the simple reason that we get to see almost all the characters that have been introduced since the first Iron Man movie up to now, taking part in one big battle. Now sure, I think there are some missed opportunities that could have happened in the battle, but the moments that we do see in the battle I think are great. Everything from seeing Captain America, Iron Man, Thor battling Thanos before everyone else shows up, to Scarlet Witch battling Thanos himself, or the scenes where we have the characters playing Keep Away with the Gauntlet, Ant-Man punching one of the space whales. Honestly, if I had to name my 10 favorite moments from this movie, most of them would come from this climax. Now we enter the portion of the movie review in which I talk about aspects of the movie that I had mixed feelings towards, starting with something that I mentioned at the very beginning of the movie review, being the advertising. I know that's a really strange aspect to talk about in regards to the movie itself, but hear me out. As I stated at the beginning of this review, Avengers Endgame was indeed one of the more anticipated movies of 2019, but my excitement for the movie was at an all-time low because of the movie trailers, because of how lackluster they were. Especially when you compare the trailers to this movie and the movie trailers for Avengers Infinity War, which were very bombastic and over the top. However, the one advantage the trailers for Endgame have over Infinity War is that they don't spoil the better moments of the movie. Because a lot of movie trailers today have a tendency to either reveal the best parts of the movie or sometimes showcase the entire movie in terms of how it starts, how it progresses, and how it ends, to a point that you don't even technically need to see the movie itself. With the movie trailers for Endgame, that is perhaps the best aspect of them. They don't show the best bits, saving them for the movie itself. Because I will admit, even though the trailers for Avengers Infinity War did get me excited for that movie, I will admit, the trailers for that movie, I think, showed a bit too much, to a point that when I saw that movie for the first time, there were points in time in which I started thinking, okay, when is this scene gonna show up? Basically making a mental checklist. With the advertising for this movie, on the other hand, you don't get that, because the trailers do a good job of hiding not only the best bits, but how the movie unfolds with its story. Since I found the trailers to this movie to be very lackluster, especially when you compare them to the movie trailers for Avengers Infinity War. Another aspect of the movie that I have mixed feelings towards revolve around Captain Marvel herself, because in my review of Captain Marvel, I stated that of all the characters to exist within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I stated that she is one of my least favorite characters for two reasons. Reason number one, I found the character of Captain Marvel in regards to her personality to be very boring. Reason number two, the character on pen and paper felt like comic book sloppy seconds, in that sense where it felt like the filmmakers took different aspects of Iron Man, War Machine, and Scarlet Witch and put them into a blender, thus creating this incarnation of Captain Marvel as opposed to the one that most people would know from the comics. And when it came time for Captain Marvel to appear in Avengers Endgame, this is where things get super dicey. Because as I mentioned a few moments ago, up to this point, she's been one of my least favorite characters within the MCU. And with the movie being directed yet again by the Russo brothers, I was hoping that they would have found a way to make improvements upon the character of Captain Marvel. So when it came time for Captain Marvel to finally appear in an Avengers movie, such as Avengers Endgame, meet up with all the other Avengers, I found the way in which the movie utilized her character to be very disappointing for a few reasons. Reason number one, from a writing standpoint, I was really hoping that the Russo brothers would have made some improvements upon her, the way Captain Marvel is written. As is, they barely made any improvements. Keyword barely, because there is a moment where we see her interacting with Peter Parker, and I like the way she was written in that moment. She seemed to have a bit of a personality there. I just wish that it carried over both before and after that moment for this movie. As it is, she's no different than the way she acted in her own solo movie. Reason number two has to do with her screen time. Because of all the characters that appear within this movie, she has the least amount of screen time, which means I don't have to see her as often as some of the other characters, which also leads into a big problem. Because she has so limited screen time within the context of the movie, that she barely appears in it. To a point that I forgot she was even in the movie. Yeah, no joke. The first time I saw this movie, from the point Scott Lang reappears up to the moment Captain Marvel destroys Thanos' ship, I completely and utterly forgot she was even in the movie, because she has so little presence within the actual story itself, to a point that you could have written her out of the movie and rewrite that one scene in which, instead of having Captain Marvel destroy Thanos' ship, have it be Scarlet Witch instead, and nothing would have changed. Which makes me wonder, why did Marvel decide to include this character in the first place? Seriously, between the mid-credit scene from Avengers Infinity War to her own solo movie, along with the mid-credit scene from that movie, which leads directly into this movie, along with the advertisements for this movie, you would think Captain Marvel would play a bigger role in Avengers Endgame, but she doesn't. So now I'm in a situation in which my least favorite character has the least amount of screen time within the movie, thankfully, but at the same time, I wish the character was improved upon from a writing standpoint and played a bigger role within the context of the movie. Another aspect of the movie that I had mixed feelings towards are the points in time in which the movie itself makes bold and unpredictable choices that in the grand scheme of things don't really make a whole lot of sense. There are a few examples that come to mind, but the one that I'm predominantly am going to talk about revolves around Black Widow sacrificing herself in order for the Avengers to retrieve the Soul Stone. Now, why I want to talk about this moment. The first time I ever saw the movie and this occurred, this was just one of those moments that I didn't see coming. I didn't think the filmmakers were going to kill off Black Widow. Because within the context of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Widow not only was one of the original founding members of the Avengers, but she was also the first female member. So for the filmmakers to kill this character off was super unexpected, which also leads into a problem that I have with her sacrifice. It makes no sense. Now, I get why she sacrifices herself within the movie, given that she never really had a family, unlike Hawkeye, who lost his during the snap. But here's the thing. I think Hawkeye should have sacrificed himself in order for the Avengers to retrieve the Soul Stone. And here are my reasons as to why I think that should be the case. Within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, up to this point, Black Widow and Hawkeye have been underutilized in one of two ways. With Black Widow, even though she appears in a lot more movies than Hawkeye, we haven't had too much character development for her. Whereas Hawkeye, on the other hand, not only has he been underdeveloped, but we haven't seen too much of him. And within the first hour of this movie, you have Black Widow, who's doing Captain America's job of being the de facto leader, trying to maintain the peace and talking to all the other remaining Avengers, whereas Hawkeye, on the other hand, became this Punisher-styled vigilante known as the Ronin, who goes around killing organized crime rings, ranging from drug cartels to the Yakuza. So within the first hour of this movie, these two have become a lot more interesting than their previous appearances in some of the other MCU movies. And the main reason as to why I think Hawkeye should have been the one to sacrifice himself instead of Black Widow is that at the beginning of the movie, as I mentioned before, it's established that he became a vigilante because of the loss of his family. There's a redemption arc waiting to be explored here. As the movie sits, Black Widow sacrifices herself and Hawkeye relearns his family values, but the movie also ignores the fact that the man was a complete psychopath for the past 5 years because he lost his family during the snap. That to me is really messed up. And much like Hawkeye, I also feel that by killing off Black Widow, there was a missed opportunity here. Because like I said a few moments ago, at the start of the movie, she became a de facto leader while Rogers was doing group therapy. Maybe at the end of the movie, Steve Rogers comes to the conclusion that perhaps he should retire and maybe pass on the mantle of Captain America to Black Widow, making her the new Captain America. Sure, this would be super inaccurate to the comics since Black Widow has never taken up the mantle of Captain America before. But the way I see things, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has changed up so much from its source material that I think having Black Widow become a new incarnation of Captain America for the MCU probably could have worked. And as for the last aspect of the movie that I have mixed feelings towards, has to do with what the filmmakers did to both Hulk and Thor after the 5-year time skip, because I love what they did with Thor, but I hated what they did to the Hulk. Starting with what I liked about Thor post 5 years. Again, going back to what I said about Black Widow dying, seeing Thor be super fat in this movie, I thought was hysterical. And within the context of the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, made a ton of sense from a tragic point of view, considering that within all the Thor movies, plus Avengers Infinity War, Thor had lost something. With Thor the Dark World, his mother died. Thor Ragnarok, his father, best friends, and to some extent his sister all die. And at the beginning of Avengers Infinity War, Loki gets killed along with Heimdall, with the added bonus of his big sister destroying his hammer and having Suitor destroy all of Asgard. Then you get the way this movie begins with him, Captain Marvel, along with some of the other Avengers, trying to retrieve the Infinity Stones from Thanos, Thanos, only to discover that Thanos destroyed them in case if they did retrieve them, which leads to Thor killing that version of Thanos. So having Thor be fat after the 5-year time skip makes a ton of sense within the context of this movie. And the way I view Fat Thor within the context of this whole movie, I view it as it being the modern day equivalent to Jack Burton during the climax of Big Trouble in Little China. Since within the context of the movie before he even has a chance to fight Lopan, we see him making out with one of the women who he's there to rescue that just so happens to have a ton of makeup on her face. So after they are done kissing, you see a ton of makeup on Jack Burton's face, and when he does have his eventual showdown with Lopan, he kills Lopan while having all this makeup on his face. That to me is hysterical, and that's how I view Fat Thor within this movie. As for the Incredible Hulk, on the other hand, I really don't like what they did to the Hulk in this movie, and I am very well aware that there are some points in time where Bruce Banner's consciousness does enter the body of the Hulk, creating Professor Hulk. And while some people make the argument that maybe having Hulk with Bruce Banner's consciousness is the logical step within the context of this universe, to me, I really don't think that's the case, because I don't think it was properly built up. Now, let's examine the Hulk throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Between the first and second Avengers movie, this is a man who wants to rid himself of the Hulk. And he sort of came off as a classic Universal monster in that sense. I mean, does anyone not remember the scene from the first Avengers movie where he talked about how he tried to commit suicide by shooting himself, but the other guy spat the bullet out? That was some really dark stuff. Fast forward to Thor Ragnarok. The Hulk is a big man-child, which I find to be hysterical, but a man-child nonetheless. And during that movie, it's established that if Bruce Banner were to Hulk out once more, the Hulk would be in permanent control. With Avengers Infinity War, after Hulk got his ass handed to him by Thanos, Bruce Banner could not Hulk out throughout the remainder of the movie. Within the context of this movie, both Bruce Banner and the Hulk have merged into one entity, resulting in Professor Hulk. And when we do see Professor Hulk, he is the comical relief both within and outside of the movie, since he's often cracking jokes or doing the dap pose. Just let that sink in. First Avengers movie, Bruce hated being the Hulk so much, he tried to kill himself, but failed. Fast forward to this movie, comical relief character. Now, I could understand if the filmmakers wanted to use Professor Hulk in a way that would result with him having a rematch with Thanos. I think that could have worked, where it turned out that the reason why the Hulk lost against Thanos in the first place was due to the fact that he's all bronze but no brains, whereas Thanos on the other hand had both the bronze and the brains. Thus, maybe this leads to Bruce Banner coming to the conclusion that in order to defeat Thanos, both he and the Hulk need to set aside their differences in order to become Professor Hulk. And perhaps during that 5-year time skip, it's revealed that not only have the two become one, but Black Widow and Captain America, when they're not being de facto leader or going to group therapy, have been training the Hulk, giving them both the brains to use the bronze. So yeah, long story short, I love Fat Thor, but Professor Hulk, not so much. Now, in terms of what I disliked about the movie, I was not the biggest fan of the way this movie was structured, especially considering that this was meant to be the grand finale to the Infinity Saga, something that was started back in 2012 with the first Avengers movie. Because when you look at other movies that usually have to have a part 1 or part 2, such as Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows or Mockingjay, part 1 is usually structured as a slow burn that sets up part 2, and part 2 is the all-out spectacle grand battle that wraps up everything. With Avengers Endgame, on the other hand, that's not the case. Sure, the last half hour of this movie is a big grand battle between all the heroes and Thanos' forces, but getting to that point took a while, since a majority of the movie is just our heroes on the time heist. And upon rewatching the movie, I really couldn't tell you what happened in regards to the action. Sure, you got the one point in time where you have Captain America battling his younger self, but I wish there was more twists and turns like that throughout the majority of the movie. So yeah, between Avengers Infinity War along with Avengers Endgame, it seems that the filmmakers decided to instead do the usual part 1 be the slow burn with part 2 being the bombastic grand finale. It seems like they wanted to switch things up and do it the other way around, with Avengers Infinity War being the bombastic grand battle and have part 2 be the slow burn. Another problem that I have with the movie was something that I originally considered putting in my aspects of the movie that I had mixed feelings towards, I now have come to the conclusion maybe it was a big mistake on the filmmaker's part. Because on the one hand, it's a very bold choice to do, but I feel like there was missed opportunities there. That being the 5-year time skip. And the problem I have with that 5-year time skip is that we are robbed of actual character development. Because we see the conclusions to many of what the Avengers have gone through over the course of 5 years, but we don't see them going to that point. And I think what the movie should have done was have that 3 hours be dedicated to those 5 years. See how all of these characters have developed over the course of 5 years, such as seeing Thor get depressed, leading to him being fat, or Banner coming to the conclusion that he has to merge with the Hulk to become Professor Hulk, seeing Hawkeye's descent into becoming a Punisher-style vigilante known as the Ronin, or seeing Tony Stark being a father and raising his kid. Because the rule of movie making is to show and not tell. And the way this 5-year time skip affects the entire movie, we see the conclusions to many story arcs, but we don't see anything leading up to them because the movie is explaining 5 years worth of material in the span of 5 to 10 minutes in a 3-hour movie, in which it could have had opportunity to showcase why many of these characters came to these conclusions over the course of 5 years, but the filmmakers decided, no, we're not going to show you, we're going to tell you, breaking the golden rule of filmmaking. Another plot point that I have a problem with has to do with Stormbreaker. Near the climax, before Captain America uses Thor's hammer, since the rule of thumb with Thor's hammer is that whomever is worthy shall possess the power of Thor, and a good majority of the characters within the Marvel Cinematic Universe have a problem lifting up the hammer, which made sense. But when it comes to Stormbreaker, the rules are kind of vague, since I was under the assumption that Stormbreaker would have operated by the same rules that the hammer would have abided by, yet there's a moment in which Thanos grabs Stormbreaker while it's flying towards Thor and tries to kill Thor with it. And while it is an unexpected moment, I didn't really understand why it was happening. I just wish there was a bit more context behind how Stormbreaker operated. Also, I didn't think the humor in this movie was as strong as it has been in the past, and while I don't think it's as out of place as seen with the humor presented in Black Panther, some of the jokes in this movie I didn't find to be too particularly funny, which I find to be super weird because every time I went to go see an MCU movie in the past in the theater, most of the time the theater was packed, and the jokes were usually funny and that usually got a reaction out of the audience. This time around, when I actually went to go see this movie in theaters, I think there were 3 jokes that the audience laughed at throughout the whole movie. Other than that, the whole movie was just kept quiet. Actually, now that I think about it, that's just how this whole movie was in general. Because the more I think back on it, something just seemed off with this movie altogether. Because as I mentioned before, anytime I've gone to see an MCU movie in the past in a theater, the crowd usually had some kind of reaction, regardless if it was a joke, dramatic moment, or an action scene. It garnered a reaction from the audience. With this movie, outside of Fat Thor or Captain America using Thor's hammer against Thanos, there wasn't too many reactions to the movie that I could think of. It was just so quiet. I don't know why, but it was just off. Maybe it was one of those things where the audience I saw it with was taking this movie more seriously, which might explain the more subdued reaction, but this was the same audience that I saw Avengers Infinity War with, and that got so much reactions. So I'm kind of confused as to why this movie didn't get as many reactions as that movie did. Just something seems off with this movie, and I just can't put my finger on it. But anywho, another problem I have with the movie revolves around what the filmmakers did to Captain America at the very end of the movie. Because this to me seems like a complete portrayal of what was established before. Since when you really look at Captain America's story arc from Captain America First Avenger up to this movie, between First Avenger and the first Avengers movie, Captain America was a Boy Scout in that movie, who was very much about being a good soldier and serving your country. Winter Soldier comes around, and while he's still trying to carry that mantle, he's also trying to adapt to the world while still holding on to his ideas. In Age of Ultron, Captain America has came to the conclusion that the Captain America who went into the ice died and someone else came out, which cemented his character moving forward as being someone who just wants to do the right thing no matter what. And seeing what the filmmakers did to Captain America at the very end of the movie, where they give him a happy ending, I felt betrayed that, since it seemed that Captain America wanted to move on from the first Captain America movie and just live a happy life. Personally, I think what the filmmakers should have done with Captain America is to establish at the very beginning of the movie he's losing his superpowers because the super soldier serum is finally wearing off, and by the time you get to the end of the movie, it's finally worn off, which forces Captain America into retirement. That, I think, would have been a bit more fitting for Captain America as opposed to what they did to him in this movie. Another problem that I have with the movie has to do with the scene during the climax in which we see all the female heroes gather together, but it's not for the reason you think, because a majority of people, myself included, don't really like what the movie was trying to do in a social political sense, for the simple reason that it doesn't make any sense. Now, I get what the filmmakers were trying to do in regards to recapturing that girl power moment from Avengers Infinity War, but the context behind that scene made a lot more sense as opposed to the girl power moment in this movie. Case in point, with Avengers Infinity War, we see Scarlet Witch battling Proxima Midnight, and we see that she's having a hard time fighting Proxima Midnight. Then, moments later, we see her get back up in the form of Black Widow and Okoye, and with the combined forces of all three of them, manage to defeat Proxima Midnight. That to me made sense considering that Scarlet Witch was having a hard time with Proxima Midnight. With this movie, on the other hand, we see Captain Marvel enter the final battle, destroys Thanos' ship, and then moments later she gets back up. Why? The movie just established she's powerful enough to destroy Thanos' ship, and when we see her standing next to Peter Parker, looking at an army heading towards them, she gets back up? This just doesn't make any sense. Now, I could maybe see a variation of this battle where we see Captain Marvel being super arrogant, go into the army, destroy most of them, but then she gets super overwhelmed to a point in which she needs backup. Then I think the context of having all the female characters would make a lot more sense, but the way the movie currently sits, I don't think it was warranted. Now, as for the last problem that I have with the movie, well, before I even address the problem, I have to address my viewing experience of the movie. Because the first time I saw Avengers Endgame in theaters, I will admit, I felt this sense of being underwhelmed by it. And at the time, I couldn't figure out why. Was it perhaps that the movie was overhyped by both movie critics and movie-going audiences alike? Perhaps. But it wasn't until I decided to rewatch Avengers Infinity War, along with, oddly enough, X-Men Days of Future Past, in which I saw the problem with this movie. My biggest problem with Avengers Endgame is that it lacked a sense of urgency and stakes. Because when you look at the previous installment, along with X-Men Days of Future Past, those two movies have something in common. There's a goal, they have stakes, and there's a sense of urgency. With Avengers Infinity War, the goal for our main heroes is to prevent Thanos from obtaining all the Infinity Stones. The urgency is that Thanos is slowly succeeding in collecting all the stones as the movie progresses. The stakes are that if the heroes fail, Thanos will succeed in wiping out half of all life in the universe. With X-Men Days of Future Past, the goal is for the future X-Men to send Logan back in time to assemble the younger version of Charles and Magneto to prevent Mystique from killing Trask in order to prevent the creation of the Sentinels. The urgency is that the future Sentinels are closing in on the future X-Men as they continue their mission, because the stakes of that movie are that the Sentinels have not only destroyed most of the mutants of planet Earth, but also captured most of humanity in some shape or form. With Avengers Endgame, we have a goal, which is our main heroes have to recollect all the Infinity Stones in order to undo Thanos' snap from the previous movie. But there's no sense of urgency and there are no stakes involved. Even in key moments that occur throughout the whole movie, you think, okay, here's a scene that should raise the stakes, but it doesn't. And I can think of a few examples. One example being midway through the movie where Iron Man, Captain America, and Ant-Man fail to get the Tesseract. And the Loki from the first Avengers movie grabs the Tesseract and escapes. You would think that both Iron Man and Captain America would have to chase after Loki. No, they don't. When the scene ends, everyone just looks at each other and acts as if milk has been spilt. I mean, really? You just lost the Tesseract and you treat it like spilt milk? And then Iron Man and Captain America come to a conclusion. They're like, wait a minute, I think I know a point in time in which we can do this and this, and then go to a different point in time to get the Tesseract then and there. It felt like the only reason why we didn't get a chance for Iron Man or Captain America to chase after Loki is so that we could have that Loki TV show on Disney Plus. That's it. Another example that comes to mind occurs near the end of the movie, in which we see Bruce Banner snap the universe back to normal, and then Thanos shows up. Wouldn't it have been a little bit more interesting when you have the Avengers successfully gather all the stones and they're debating as to who should reset the universe, then have Thanos attack before they even have the opportunity to use the gauntlet? Create a sense of urgency and stakes involved. As the movie plays out, Bruce Banner successfully brings everybody back, Thanos attacks, and then we sit there for several minutes waiting for all the other characters to show up and defeat Thanos. I mean, I could sit here and list more examples of certain scenes that play out one way but could have been done differently. However, I think you get my point as to why I found Avengers Endgame to be so underwhelming. So, for my final verdict of Avengers Endgame, while I think the movie does a good job of serving as a good conclusion to the Infinity Saga that was started back in 2012's The Avengers, however, I think the movie could have been a lot better, because as Avengers Endgame sits, it ends with a bang, with that awesome climax, but everything leading up to that climax I found to be super underwhelming. So overall, Avengers Endgame is good, but not great. And before I give my final rating, what did everyone else have to say about Avengers Endgame? So it looks like Avengers Endgame got super overwhelmingly positive reception. I mean, I know the movie's good, but I didn't think it was that good. And so, for my final rating of Avengers Endgame, I give it a 3 out of 5. So, Avengers Endgame has been called the cinematic event of a lifetime. Do you guys agree or disagree? And see you later.